Hello, I'm John McTaggart from Talking Blues, and this is session 4 of our examination of the kind of themes of questions that are likely to come up at your local in-force interview, which most people actually do after they've passed the assessment centre, but you may get beforehand. Theme 4 is our ability to be confident that you have the ability to make decisions, because as a police officer, your role day in, day out, minute by minute, involves making decisions. And it's not like a Bruce Willis kind of thing, this. It's not making that sudden snap decision and springing into action. Although you may have to do that, but it's pretty rare. What we are interested in is how you approach normal decisions. And I'm going to refer briefly to a thing called the National Decision-Making Model as we go through this. And the National Decision-Making Model is a simple way of you applying a thought process to your decision. And that thought process can apply to anything from deciding what you're going to have for your tea to how you're going to deal with a major road traffic crash. So, for example, you get in for your tea this evening, you're hungry, and you'd be tempted to think to yourself, well, I just throw something in a microwave and that's it. You know, I have that chicken curry, it's heated up, that's it for my dinner. What you've done there is you will have utilised the National Decision-Making Model. So first of all, when you've arrived at home, you will have thought to yourself, I am hungry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the fridge and the cupboards and the cabinets. I'm going to have a look at what's in there. So in short, what you are doing is you are assessing the situation. You are actually analysing what options you have open to you. So you are gathering what kind of food is actually in there. There's a load of frozen food, meals of different types. There is fresh food there you could actually prepare yourself. There is some bread on the counter which you could actually have. So you're assessing how hungry you are, how long you have, and what ingredients are actually there. So that's assessment. But what we're now interested in is looking at our options, because that's the next stage of the decision-making model. And you're going to explain all this to the panel each stage as you go through. So your options then are to microwave that frozen meal, to order a takeaway, to make yourself some toast. That's what we mean by options. So you might generate for yourself 3 or 4 options. And then you will decide which of those options you actually intend to actually utilise. And you will discard some options and factor other options in. And what you are doing there is you're applying a rationale to each of those options. Well, I actually quite fancy doing a curry from scratch, but that'll take me an hour and I haven't got that hour to do. So I'm going to disregard that. I have got a frozen meal there, but it's only a small portion and I'm too hungry for that. So that's disregarded. So what I'm left with now then is options of either doing some fresh lasagna or a carton of soup, whatever. And you're able to actually explain in your own head why you've disregarded some options and why you've picked another option. And having picked the option that you want, you then need to put that into effect. And that's what we're talking about, implementing this particular idea. So we want to know that having assessed the situation, having gathered all the necessary information, you then generated a range of options for yourself. You then looked at those options, decided the advantages and disadvantages of each option, then actually decided which of those options you were going to use, and then actually implemented it and put that option into effect. But that doesn't mean that you can then go home happy or go back to your couch happy, having been fed. Because before you do that, you're going to use the final stage of the model. And the final stage of the model is to reassess the situation, to actually say to yourself, okay, I was hungry. I generated information. I looked at my options. I decided which option was best. I utilised those options. Am I still hungry or not? And that's the basis of the decision-making model for a very, very simplistic kind of thing like cooking one meal you wanted. But you apply that model to more difficult kinds of questions. So if you are asked anything at all about decision-making, you are able to say, well, this is the outline of the situation I found myself in, using circumstances, actions, results, as we said in the first session. And then you're going to describe, using these key words here, how you applied your thought process to actually solving that problem. So let's look at the common kinds of questions that can come up. When have you made a difficult decision? And ideally, these kind of difficult decisions are things whereby you've really, really had to think hard about what it is you're going to do. Ideally, something's kept you awake late of a night. The more difficult decision, the more complex the factors involved, the longer you had to think about it, the more sleepless nights you had will probably make a better answer because it will give you more to talk about. For example, the kind of things people often say to us in terms of difficult decisions are issues such as, I had to tell my mum and dad I didn't want to become a barrister. I was going to leave that law degree, I was halfway through, and I was going to join the police. Telling your mum and dad that although they were anticipating loads of grandchildren, actually you're gay. Yeah, that's a real big decision to actually make. Telling people that you're going to leave your job, that you are going to emigrate. They're the kinds of key decisions in life that do require a lot of thinking about. If we look at a work context, it might be that you work with a colleague, perhaps he was a good friend, and they were doing something wrong or not following a procedure. And what you had to do was make the decision to report them. Maybe there was a member of your staff or your team who simply wasn't up to the job and you had to write a report which would get them disciplined. Maybe you had to make a report about dismissing that particular individual. Maybe it was around a project that you were involved in. You might have been an electrician wiring a house and you were told that you had to decide on the specification of that house, or you had to work with fewer people, or you had to choose a different supplier. They can be difficult decisions. And you're going to apply the national decision-making model to that in terms of assessing the situation, generating options, choosing one of those options, implementing it, and then reassessing the situation. And that's how you're going to apply that to the sort of difficult decisions that you're going to use as examples. Linked in with that, we will often say to you, well, okay, so you made this difficult decision. What made it difficult? And perhaps it's because somebody simply disagreed with you. Perhaps it was your boss who disagreed with you, because that can make life harder. So we're interested there in how you then dealt with that disagreement. What we don't want is to have people who will say to us, well, as you said, no, I'm the senior officer here. It's my decision. That's what I'm going to stick with. That's the wrong way to go about it. We're interested in how you communicated with that individual. And hopefully, if you told your mum and dad you weren't going to go to university, but instead you were going to join the police, what would have happened is when mum and dad objected, you would then say to them, okay, why, mum and dad, are you concerned? And you would listen to their concerns. And you would give credibility to their concerns. And then you would explain to them why you felt there was mitigation for those complaints, those concerns. You would explain to them why you were doing what you were doing. And hopefully by the time you had done that and listened to their counter views and arguments, they would realise the reasons why you were doing what you were doing. They would have been clear that there was a logic behind what you were doing, and they would be able to support you. And that would be a great way of dealing with a decision which somebody actually disagreed with. Because, of course, on occasion, the person disagreeing with you might actually be right, and they may come up with something that you haven't thought of. And that's the reason why we must listen to that individual. Linked in with that again, the final point I have up there is that making a decision that later went wrong. And making a decision that goes wrong isn't a sign of weakness. Making a decision that goes wrong is a natural consequence of people who make loads and loads of decisions every day. Not every decision can possibly be right. So pick a decision that on the face of it you were correct in making based on what you knew at the time. Using the decision-making model, obviously. So you've actually made this decision based on what you knew at the time, and then perhaps later on it didn't achieve what you wanted it to do, or the effects weren't quite what you thought, or actually the objections that were put forward, even though you mitigated them as best you could, actually turned out to be worse, or you hadn't fully factored them in. And we're not troubled by the fact that you made a wrong decision. We're not troubled by the fact that you recognise you're making a wrong decision. We will be pleased and interested in the fact that you've learned from that decision. So be able to tell us that later on you realised such and such a point hadn't been fully thought through. And what you learned from that was the fact that moving forward, whenever you make a decision now, you make a point sitting down wherever possible with all the people involved, getting their various perspectives, making sure you fully understand everything, maybe even jotting yourself a list of advantages and disadvantages to each potential course of action you could take. And that's what you will learn from that. The fact that some decisions do have to be taken very, very quickly, most don't, and have the ability to actually be thought through. And depending on the complexity of that thinking through process might take 2 seconds, or it might take a year. Most decisions don't need to be made instantly. There is an element of thinking time behind them. And that's what we wanted to hear from you about when you made a decision that went wrong. But remember, as you're talking about all of these key decisions, and it's stuff that actually using the decision-making model. One final point linked in with all of this is the fact that quite often when we start talking about difficult decisions, people will want to recount some crisis or drama or trauma they've undergone. So quite often I walked around a corner and there was a motorcyclist who'd fallen off his bike and he was badly injured, and I ran over and I had to intervene and decide what I was going to do. Yeah, okay. But the reality of that is that clearly what you had to do is dial 999, and a few minutes later the ambulance crew turned up and you handed it over to them. The chances are that's actually what happened. So your decision was, to be honest, made for you. You were never going to walk on by, hopefully. You were never going to not call the emergency services. And when the ambulance crew turned up, you were never going to say, I know best. So remember, when we're going to decisions, and when you're talking about decisions, pick something whereby you have a range of genuine options to actually pick, rather than, I just came across this. We're not looking for life and death type stuff. Although maybe you will have an example like that. We're looking for your thought process. And it's the thought process that, whenever you turn up an incident, will be the thing that gets you through. And that's the importance of the decision-making model.